I'd like to talk to you a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. A lot of the things that happened from my side of the story. There's been a lot written and a lot said about what happened to me, but never from my side.
Right. So, hi guys. Welcome back to a new episode of Let's Talk Elvis. Today, we got one of my favorite people ever in the Elvis community in the world. Just a really good, close friend, Sally Hoedel. How are you, Sally?
I am good. How are you? It's so good to see you.
So good to see you too. I miss you so much.
I know we didn't get to chat and catch up in January, and I was looking for you, and then we ended up texting a little bit back and forth. So yeah,
Yes,
it's good to see you.
Good to see you. Sally's been like number one on my little list of like guests I wanted to have forever. And like we keep planning it. We're like, oh, maybe during Elvis week we can get together and talk and it never, because it's so busy every single time.
But it's so ridiculous, isn't it? We're always so hopeful during Elvis week. Like, like what does your schedule look like? What does mine look like? We actually share a couple of ideas that might work, knowing full well they're not going
it's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen. No, and you're so right. Every time we're like, no, we could. And then it's always, it's classic Elvis week where we just don't have time, like you're saying, to even sleep or eat or anything.
Yeah.
But so we're finally getting around, even though we're not in person. This is the next best thing.
Second best thing for sure.
Absolutely. No, but me and Sally have been friends for a while. I think ever since like your book first came out, we started chatting.
Yeah. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
Was it a birthday? I think it might have been a birthday, or was it an Elvis week when we first met in person? But
Elvis week.
Been years.
Yes. And I just remember, I'll let you talk. I mean, everybody knows about Destined to Die Young too. And if you don't, listen. If you don't, gotta read it. I always say it's like, I call it the Elvis Bible because I just feel like everything that's in like that knowledge like is the root of all other Elvis knowledge. Like you just understand him so much more as a human being and as a person from understanding his health and his body, and like that plays into all of his choices that he made and like how he lived his life and all of that jazz. So if you haven't read the book, you got to read it. But yeah, I think we've been, from the moment that I read the book, I was just such a huge supporter of what you do and your work. And so that's kind of how we became connected in the spirit of the series.
Absolutely. And likewise, it's just so great to connect with other contributors, who are in it for the right reason and who care, and care about his legacy, but also that level of understanding that you're talking about. That it is so important to me. It was important before anyone ever read the book, as I was researching and the dots were connecting. It was more and more, what started out as brain candy as a journalist and an Elvis fan really became a people have to know about this, because it was so important for Elvis. So the fact that, you've helped promote it, I'm so grateful for that. And I tell Elvis fans all the time, because they're always talking to each other, and Destined to Die Young continues to do very, very well, and it continues to spread, and it is that word of mouth. And I can't make that happen. I can't buy it. I can't market it. I can't create it. It is such like a grassroots thing that Elvis fans have done by talking about this and saying, look, it makes his choices make sense, and it helps us understand Elvis more. I just really appreciate all of that. And of course, the support from you and talking about it, on Instagram and all of that. And it is not just a health book. It does let us understand what was going on with him health-wise, but like for new fans, maybe from who discovered Elvis through the movie or something like that. I think the book does a really good job too and it was one of those things that I had to work through of how to present the information, but I did want the book to reach pop culture enthusiasts and not just Elvis fans. And so I wanted his life story to be in there too, not so much that it bored Elvis fans who already know everything, but that if you weren't an Elvis fan, you picked it up, you would learn what you need to know too. So I think it has a good balance of that.
I agree. I always say too, because I remember my first Elvis book I ever read was Elvis and Me. And I think that's true for a lot of people that are trying to get into Elvis, because you think, that would be the book that would tell you all that you would need to know.
Right.
But since the movie, especially, people have come to me, new fans have come to me and like asked, what books do you recommend? Because you always get like the classic, like the Mafia book or like, Jerry Schelling's book. And not that they're not good books, but I always say like read Destined to Die Young first and then everything else after that, because I promise like it truly does clear up so much, because it's hard to, and I know we talk about this a lot, but everybody in the Elvis world has like different perspectives, different like
Right.
the lens of like how stuff happened to them versus like how stuff happened to, you know, Larry Geller or Red or Sonny, whatever.
Yeah.
And so it can get like overwhelming. I would assume, especially as a new fan, just now like learning about Elvis through the movie, reading just book after book written by different people who experienced different things.
I can't imagine being a new fan and just starting out and reading things, because there's just finding out that there's so much contradiction from everybody. You know, how would you know what to think and what to believe? I mean, that really takes a long time to sort of figure that out. And it is a very human story, and it is human perspective, and human perspective is going to be different from everyone who actually lived it, you know.
Absolutely.
Even though they're all experiencing the same thing, their individual human perspective will be different. And you know, I know sometimes in the beginning, I don't get it anymore, but in the beginning I got, you know, you're too young to know anything about Elvis, and you know, you weren't there, you didn't know him, how would you know? But they were all living in such an alternate universe, surviving that level of fame, and Elvis creating this world where he could have some kind of normalcy, that the oddity of it all became normal for everybody who lived within it, because it had to survive the fame, right? This alternate universe. And then it's hard to imagine that they're just regular people getting through Monday to Sunday every week, you know, getting through the next week, getting through the next tour, getting through the next Palm Springs vacation or whatever. They're just human beings functioning in that way. So in that sense, I think it really does take someone kind of, you know, from back here looking down on all of it and reading everybody's perspective and understanding historically what was going on, to have, you know, not only a different viewpoint, but maybe a more honest viewpoint, because when everybody's in it, they can only see what's in front of them. And not everything.
Absolutely. And I think like they would all agree with you too. Like I've talked to some people who are still alive, who are close to him, and they all have pretty different perspectives as they've gone and gotten older and like gone through life. And like now they have that like look back on what they were going through, and they've tried
too. Maturity, right?
Yes. Changed how they viewed things, I think, a little bit too. Absolutely. Which I think is interesting. But I wanted to like point out, you were talking about how you used to get like, oh, you're too young, or you weren't there, so like you couldn't know. And I think that's like one of my favorite conversations that we've had, because you always bring up like this great point that is like, well, people who are writing books about like the Civil War, people who are writing books about presidents or whatever, World War II, like, and you weren't there, you didn't live through it, you didn't experience it, you weren't his best friend, whatever it may be. They never really, in the same sense, I don't think, get their credibility questioned as much as like maybe you or me or anybody who's talking about Elvis in a way where it's kind of like, this is my opinion on why this might have happened or what I think about this.
Right.
So how, like,
what is that?
You know what I mean? Why?
I do. What is that? And, you know, it is why there are 32 pages of citation in my book. You know, number one, Elvis deserves that level of journalistic integrity. Number two, he's rarely given it. And number three, I'm treating him like a historical figure, like you said, like Washington and Jefferson and, you know, all these people that are still written about and researched from people who could not have possibly been alive or have known him. So, you know, I don't, it's hard to understand what that is. And I don't know, because I do want Elvis. I believe he's a historical figure. I think if we think of him as an historical figure, he is given more respect and more appreciation. You know, we have to get him out of that rock and roll, you know, sex, drugs, and rock and roll agenda, because he's much more than that. He culturally shifted the universe. So that requires a certain level of research and a certain level of integrity to the work. And, you know, it was really important to me. So I don't know why Elvis gets discredited in that way.
I don't either. I think a lot of celebrities kind of do as well. Like, maybe it's just a celebrity thing where it's different from being a historical figure type of, because you wouldn't call like George Washington a celebrity. Like there's a boundary in there. You know what I mean?
Sure, but everybody still wants to know about his relationship with Martha. You know, everybody still wants to know about his life at Mount Vernon. Just what's the difference? Life at Graceland, life at Mount Vernon. You know, it's still similar. So yeah, it's interesting that it is treated so differently.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the things I appreciate most about your book, but also like you as a person, because you don't, and like no shade, but there are people who I think lack that credibility, like lack that research that you've put in, and the years that you've spent like understanding what you're now talking about, and kind of come at it from like I don't know what the word would be, but like personal kind of like how they feel must be how Elvis would have felt, or
Yes.
like,
Yeah,
you
they
know,
put them what
yes.
yes, it lacks objectivity, right?
Yes, there you
It
go.
lacks
Yes.
objectivity. And
Yes.
someone last week commented, and they had not read the book, and I don't care. Read the book, don't read the book.
Yep.
Read the book, love the book, hate the book. We
Yeah.
can talk about that all day long.
Yeah.
But do not talk about the book if you haven't read the book.
If you haven't read it. Yep. Yep.
That is just like going to a restaurant or being a restaurant critic, doing a write-up on the restaurant and never having gone there and ate the food. Like so that is something I have just zero understanding or patience for. And someone who did not read the book was telling me how I wasn't there, and they said your book is just researched opinions. Like,
I'm sorry. Wait,
researched
what?
opinions. What is that?
Yeah, that's new to me.
What is that?
Right.
Like like there is documentation, there are interviews, there are sources. This isn't just Sally Hoedel, what she thinks of Elvis, and I'm going to go try to find some people to agree with me. I understand that's how the internet works, and I understand that's how social media works, but that is not how journalism works. That's not how writing a book with citation works. You have to find legitimate sources and real documentation, and then you build a picture from that, and you build some truth from that and some historical evidence. They are not researched opinions. I don't even know what that is.
Right. And I know we talk about this too, but it's like so energy draining to have, first of all, already spent so much time like studying about what you are about to push out. Like the people who are learning and researching and educating themselves before they're speaking, like putting in that work, but then putting that out there and then having people who clearly like have not even Googled, like made no effort at all telling you that you're wrong because this and this, and then it becomes like a whole separate like you were saying, like, you gotta watch the comments, you gotta watch what people are posting on their stories like after you say what you want to say, and it's just like I'm always so shocked at like how much energy I spend debating people in the comments that just it's so worthless because they haven't read, they haven't watched, they've done nothing, and they're not gonna because they already have their minds made up. So
and look, not everything about Elvis is a debate. Not everything about Elvis is an opinion. What your favorite song is, that is an opinion.
Sure.
Whether or not he died on August 16th, that is not an opinion. There are facts attached to that. And I think the beautiful part of Elvis that we know this, we feel it, we live it, we work it, we remember it. It connects us. The beautiful part about Elvis is that he is who people need him to be. Like people can own him in their own little way, in a way that I don't think is true for other artists. He was just so personable in that way and so connected to his fans, and it still resonates all this time later since he's been gone. And that is a beautiful thing. I say all the time that Elvis is so good at filling voids. He brings people together who maybe need more friends and, or someone who has these interests and they can't connect with other people over them. They go to Memphis and then everybody shares this interest, and it's a lovely thing. So all of that is really good, but that doesn't mean that you can place your thoughts and your opinions on who he was. You can't put that on him in a historical context because it's going to keep hurting the history. Absolutely. And if we keep doing that in a mass kind of way, especially on social media, it's going to continue to hurt the history. And one way that really happens with the fans, oftentimes, not always, just oftentimes, is the blame game. We have to stop the blame game. I wrote about that extensively in my book, even before I was on social media for years in the Elvis world, knowing just how bad that blame game is. I could see that it was keeping us from the truth and really keeping us from that level of understanding that you talk about. If you are going to constantly say it's the Colonel's fault, the Colonel killed Elvis, it's Priscilla's fault. She should have done something. It's Vernon's fault. He should have, the Memphis Mafia. Why didn't they do something? Right. All of that, to me, that is the layer of information, the layer of blame game and bickering amongst the fans that kept the layer of history buried for so long about his real health issues.
Yes.
No one saw it because it had to be someone's fault. Well, what if it wasn't someone's fault?
Right.
You know, but you have to stop that bickering for a minute to see that too. So I think it's just one example in how it can be really dangerous to continue doing that. Yeah. So it's so important just to be an educated fan, repeat things that you know to be true. If it's an opinion, state it as an opinion. But the blame game has to stop, and we have to stop repeating false information.
Absolutely. And what you said, I've never like thought of it in that way, but it's so true. Like, I feel like everybody has, for better or for worse, their version of Elvis in their head. Like my Elvis, like my friend Elvis might not be like the Elvis that you know.
Right.
And that's like what you're saying. It's a beautiful thing. Everybody connects to him in their own way, but also like those people who don't really appreciate him as much also have their own version of Elvis in their head.
Yes.
And they're very comfortable with sharing that version, but their version of Elvis is made up of like their own, like maybe 2024 standards of life and how they live and how they perceive life today, and how that immediately makes their Elvis a bad person because they don't know anything other than like how they've experienced life today, because they've not, you know, they wouldn't know. They haven't read books.
It's a difficult
articles.
thing to do, to put yourself in another person's shoes and then in another time. That's a difficult thing to do. You have to be very knowledgeable about the time. You know, you just do. I didn't know that I'd become so knowledgeable about Reconstruction in Mississippi after the Civil War. But I spent a lot of time reading that and understanding it so I could understand what Elvis's ancestors were dealing with and what decisions they were making. So that it's an excellent point. That historical lens, you know, is it's lacking today because we don't teach history in schools like we should. You know, it's not, history is story, right? It's people's story, and instead of teaching it as that, it's more like dates and wars and things like that, as opposed to human story. So then people can't put themselves in 1956 or 1935 or 1977, and then they're looking at everything through a 2024 lens. So it's an excellent point.
Yeah. Well, I love, sorry, I'm just like praising you at this point, but like that's another thing I love so much about your book is that like it does take into account like the historical perspective that you always talk about, because I feel like people, you might feel that like certain things are wrong. Like I always get like, you know, dating 14, whatever it is. Like that's the reason that like, no, like I will never give him a chance because that's disgusting. Like you would never do that. But like, just because that's,
and if they knew how old their grandparents or great grandparents were when they got married, one of them's probably 14 and the other's 20, you know, they
exactly that. It's exactly that. And that's what I always say. I always try to come at it with like, okay, for example, my great grandparents or my grandparents, even like, you have to look at it from that historical perspective, because just because you think something is not morally correct to you doesn't mean that it changes the fact that it was just the way of life. And like I really like the way that your book kind of goes about, like it doesn't say like, it doesn't give excuses for it in a sense. Like I've heard people give excuses for like, oh, the age gap or whatever. Like no, it's not that, it's this. But like you don't shy away from it. You're just giving like understanding as to why that happened, not just for Elvis and Priscilla, but for a lot of other people who grew up in the same ways that Elvis did in the South, or whatever it might be.
All of that, you know, there are several elephants in the room, so to speak, when it comes to Elvis history. And they get ignored, or they have been ignored, instead of just talking about them. So they would have talked about them for the last 4 and 5 decades. We wouldn't still be talking about them because they were just as easy. They were easier to explain away 4 and 5 decades ago than they are now, because they weren't that far removed from those things being normal. Yet no one wanted to talk about it because it was controversial, you know, whatever. It's like, talk about those elephants in the room, you know, whether it's the cultural appropriation or the young marriage, you know, the young dating. And, you know, there's like 10 of those different issues that would be, if they would have been talked about more openly from a historical standpoint, you know, the last 4 and 5 decades, instead of this So, like I always say, Elvis is the biggest victim of sensationalism and romanticism, right? We see that even with this first cousin marriage, which Albert Goldman talked about in his book, but we know how he talked about it.
Yeah.
It was horrible. You know, like he's the one who called them backwoods and hillbilly, you know, all these different horrible negative connotations.
Right.
And then it was just left there. So that's decades of having that knowledge and doing nothing productive with it because it was talked about in such a negative, stereotypical way. Instead of saying, from an intellectual standpoint, what are the consequences of that first cousin marriage?
Right.
Right. So much of this information has been there, but no one wants to talk about it, or they want to talk about it in a negative way. And then you don't want to address it because now it's a negative thing, right? Where if you just address these things, there are sensible ways to do that.
Absolutely. And it's hard. I feel like a lot of people don't want to because there is backlash, and there will be for probably ever. I think that no one will ever there'll never be peace around certain topics in the Elvis world.
Right. But then what's lost, right? It's kind of like the museums at Graceland. They're amazing. They're amazing. But they ended in 1973?
Yep. Yeah.
So what gets lost with that? First of all, you could have a real conversation about how he was a very ill man who was to a certain level self-medicating. But what really gets lost is that amazing display of fans and flowers and that outpouring of love that happened when he passed. You know, why there aren't those pictures in a separate display? I think that's really unfortunate because that outpouring of love for Elvis when he passed is every bit as important as the moments of his life that museum captures.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
So when you don't talk about these things, you're also missing out on some really great opportunities to talk about things that matter.
Absolutely. I remember I went to the Tupelo Festival. I don't remember if you were there or not, but in June of last year.
Yeah. I was there.
Okay. Yes. Okay. And like I saw the symphony show or whatever. And when I couldn't believe that they showed the 77 special in like that montage. And then I'll never get over it. The confetti that like followed the ending. Like I wish that EPE would follow with that more and like celebrate him all the way into the end, because there are it's so important. Like he had so much goodness after Aloha. Like
and especially the 77 special. You know, people are like, we don't want to remember Elvis that way. He's struggling and he's sick. He's retaining fluid. Like congestive heart failure doesn't just happen. You know, it happens over time, and you can see it already happening in that video. And yet he's there, and he's performing, and he sounds amazing. And you know, it's like I always say, the information in Destined to Die Young, it makes it a better story, an even more impressive life story.
Absolutely.
It makes him even more amazing because of all that he overcame. And it's not a story of self-destruction. It's survival, and survival through extreme poverty and then extreme fame and then all these health issues. And I just hate that people only get 60% of the story, maybe.
Yes. Yeah. And even you said too, like there have been people who come up to you and say like, I don't want to read it because it'll make me too sad or whatever. But I think just what you said, like after I read that, I had no knowledge of like, until I read the book, I thought, you know, drug overdose and he died. And like, that's all I knew. But like after I read that book, it completely shifted the Elvis I knew in my head to like he was a hero to me then. Like he was like somebody to be even more respected, more than I even did, like a testament to not even like only his musicianship, but his you know, love for his fans and his dedication and just the lengths he would go to support his family and his friends and us. And like how he continues to do that. You mentioned in your book how like even today he's still providing for us and for his family. And it's just like,
and Memphis and Tupelo.
Absolutely keeping these cities literally alive and rich in history. And I think it's like hero is the only word that comes to mind, but like it completely shifted him into like somebody that I just admired so much.
Yeah, you admire him even more. That's the thing. You admire, he epitomizes the American dream. He overcame so much to be Elvis Presley against all odds. You know, he wasn't expected to be the most famous citizen to come out of Tupelo by any stretch. And he had to work really hard to make that happen. So when you really understand that he was overcoming even more,
Yep.
it is just so imperative that we fight back, and we forget, because we are in this Elvis community all the time. We all love Elvis.
Yep.
It's a part of our day every single day. So we forget that there is a huge portion of the population out there who think he took too many pills and died in the bathroom, and that's it.
Yep.
That's all they know. And, my niece read the book really not knowing anything about Elvis when it came out. And she's probably between your age and my age. And she's like, wow, I always thought he took like hardcore drugs and then died in the bathroom. So we forget how little the average population really knows about Elvis, because they're just left with these really negative connotations, attached to how he died, and not his accomplishments or his struggles or everything he overcame. And so we got to talk about it. And I know it's, this idea that the book is too sad. Trust me, it's not. You'll walk away just not only understanding those lifestyle choices he makes. Yeah. But like you said, he's providing. And one of the things that really bugs me a lot, when we talk about the blame game, when I make a Facebook post, I'll get a lot of comments about how Elvis, it just makes him sound weak. And it's like, he just worked so hard and they pushed him on the stage every night. No, Elvis wanted to perform every night. And, and no one would help him. And he just was a money machine and he just had to keep going. It's like, no, Elvis had a pretty incredible work ethic, and he was committed to providing for all these people around him. But all of these ideas that Elvis was helpless, like I always say, geez, if he was really that helpless, why are you a fan? Because it makes it sound like he was deaf, dumb, and mute, he was not in charge or a part of his life. Like he was just pushed out on stage every night to be Elvis Presley, and that's all they know about him. Right. And that's not enough, because one thing I know for sure is that 1954 Elvis, 1955 Elvis, and 1956 Elvis was anything but a weak person, because you had to be incredibly strong and strong-willed and determined to be first and to be that different. And he looked different. He sounded different. He moved different. Everything about Elvis was radical and different. It culturally shifted the American culture. I always say how he culturally shifted the universe, but American culture was never the same after Elvis appeared on television. If he had been 10 years earlier, radio wouldn't have done it for him. He had to be on TV. So he was not a weak person by any stretch of the imagination. And if we attach all these ideas to him, that he was kind of like a helpless participant in his life, and that's what led to his demise. Again, it doesn't do him justice. No, he was such a strong, committed person.
Amen to that. And like that's probably the thing that I admire most about him. And like, you get the question, like, what about Elvis inspires you, or whatever. And I think it is that, just the fact, especially in the 50s, that he just did what he wanted to do, and he didn't care what other people thought or like expected from him, or told him that he should be doing. Because
it was so natural, right? It's not like he's being manufactured by that American Idol type of machine that we have now. It was just raw. Like no one was going out there and saying, do this, do that, be what I don't even be radical, right? Be different. Let's push the envelope. No one was saying that.
Exactly that. Happened. Yes. And he wasn't trying, like, that's something I always talk about too, is like, he wasn't out here like, how can I change the world? Like, how can I be, and it never, I don't think that was ever his mindset. He was just so uniquely himself in everything that he did. And to your point about being, weak and being pushed around and things like that, I think if you know anything about Elvis, he didn't really do anything he didn't want to do.
Right. And Elvis loved being Elvis. He said that more than once too.
Yes.
It's hard to be Elvis. Don't get me wrong. Hard. It is very, very hard to be Elvis.
But he wouldn't
also
trade
loved being Elvis Presley.
Yeah, he wouldn't trade it for anything. Yeah. And, I think that love for the fans too was a big part of that. And that's something that resonates. Even, I think that's why he is so loved across generations, and, very much still today, is because, he respected us so much. He loved us so much. And like, we still feel that today in a way.
Yeah. And what an amazing, when you talk about positive qualities or qualities to admire about a person, keeping that ego in check. That's a hard thing to balance. That's a hard thing to do. And he doesn't always succeed, obviously. He has an ego. He's Elvis Presley, and he knows it. You know?
I was just going to say.
He loves it. And he wants, just like every performer, they want to get back on that stage, and they want to feel what that's like to have everybody, you know, there to see you. Don't get me wrong. He had the ego in that sense. But he also has this beautiful way of keeping his ego in balance, in check, knowing that he's not there without the fans. He doesn't forget that 10 years in.
Yep.
A lot of people do. They get used to being famous. They get used to being rich. They get used to being successful. They forget their roots. Elvis just never, ever did. And not only forgetting his roots, but he didn't forget what it felt like to be poor. He didn't forget what it felt like to be, you know, to struggle. And he understood that people were spending their money and their effort and their time coming to see him. So keeping that ego in check and keeping that balance to it, I mean, that's really, really admirable when you are the most famous person on the planet.
Absolutely. Even letting people stand outside your house, letting people come into your house, letting people onto your lawn, letting people up on stage. I've seen so many like clips of performer, and I get it, like secure, whatever. I get today might be a little bit different, but I've seen, you know, clips of fans coming up to the stage just to hug, you know, the singer or whoever, the performer, and them like freaking out and like yelling, get off the stage, like calling up security, whatever. And I get it, it's a security thing, but like there's so many clips of Elvis just like, for better or for worse, he could have gotten shot, like who knows, but he like opened his arms and he just let them.
It's amazing. And especially at Graceland, I've been doing a lot of newspaper research, and I'm finding all these articles, especially from the 60s, from the city of Memphis, you know, and from the Memphis Journalist and the Memphis newspaper saying, here are the top 10 things to come to Memphis and do and visit. And Graceland's on the list, and he's still fully alive and living there. You know, it's not open to the public. It's not a museum. And they're saying, come to Memphis and see where Elvis lives. And it just blows my mind every time I read that, because to me, it seems rude. And a big, you know, it's pretty presumptuous. But then every time I have this conversation, people are like, oh, but Elvis wanted that, and he let them in the gates. And, you know, and I get it. He did. He was so cool about that. But when I read those articles from the early 60s, encouraging people to come to Memphis through tourism to see Elvis's house, and he's still living there, that's pretty remarkable that he was so completely okay with it.
And he could have had guards, you know, don't pass this point, and, you know, you could be fined, you could be arrested, whatever. And not even just letting them stand there, but literally like letting them, I think there was somebody inside the gate who said, and I feel like I talked to somebody, it might have been a lady who, like, I saw at Marlowe's or something during Elvis week, and she was like a gate girl at some point, and she's like, I had my birthday party on Elvis's lawn. I was like, what? That's insane to me. And he didn't care, and he probably came out and like had a piece of cake. Who knows? Like,
who knows? But it's remarkable. It just is remarkable. And I do think when I talk about that alternate universe and the way that he tried to create this bubble where he could still be, you know, normal Southern guy who didn't have to be so polished all the time, because, you know, Elvis becomes so polished compared to what he starts out as, right? And that's amazing. But he's still also this simple guy who likes simple things. Absolutely. And creating that alternate universe allows him to stay in touch with some of that. And we forget, you know, because all of a sudden he's got jumpsuits and rings on every finger, and, you know, a different car every time, you know. And we forget that he did stay. Visually, it's hard to remember that he's still trying to stay connected to being normal Elvis, but he is. And I think Graceland represents that, and his connection with the fans.
And those are things, again, you wouldn't know unless you truly did put in that, you know, a little bit of work to, I just think, like, if you care so much about opening your mouth to speak your opinion on this person, like you care enough to hit record and upload it, then you must care enough. Like, you put your energy into that. You could put your energy into actually just learning who you're talking about before you talk about them, because then you would know, like, you would understand. And I stitched a video a while ago of this person on TikTok talking about like how she just is so confused why so many people, I think like her terms were like, worship Elvis still, or like, this is the man that you still like. And I just don't understand how people can know Elvis and who he was and still like him today. And I just think that it's just that, like you just said it, like we know him not only as Elvis with the rings and Elvis with the costumes and Elvis with the girls, but Elvis Presley, like who he was as a person and a friend and a dad and all that, and it completely shifts the person that, you have in your head and the person that you're choosing to talk about then. And he deserves that so much. He deserves to be remembered for more than just the cartoon image that people only have of him in their heads.
Yeah. And we have to get out of our own way. They have to get out of their own way. We're not sitting here projecting our views of Elvis onto other people. My work isn't just, this is who I say Elvis is. My work is common sense tells us this is who Elvis is. The documentation tells us. The testimony tells us.
Yes.
It's like the thing about, Elvis being a weak person. Common sense tells you he could not have possibly been this weak pushover of a man with what he was willing to do and leave home and go out in 54, 55, and 56 and be that Elvis Presley. That's just common sense. Right. So we're not projecting our idea of Elvis, but again, a lot of people just want a platform. Yeah. Unfortunately, I think sometimes it's that negativity, that they feel is, I don't know, maybe it'll reach more people. Maybe, I don't know what that is. Cause I'm not on TikTok. I don't do that. A lot of that kind of stuff. I know. And that's the hard part of being me too, is that sometimes it's frustrating that it takes me 2 or 3 years to put out a book and everybody can put out a video in like every other day,
But it can get so overwhelming too, because like when you really think about it, anybody could say anything in the matter of 3 seconds.
It's the beautiful part. It's the beautiful part and the dangerous part of these kind of platforms, right?
Yes.
YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. People can say anything and put it out there. And I use the example all the time, that you can believe the earth is flat now, and you're going to find a lot of people who agree with you.
Yep.
And then it's easier to continue believing that because you have found other people who will support you in that belief, right?
Yes.
So if you believe that Elvis is still alive, which we know unequivocally is not true, you can find a lot of other people who will support you in that. So that is the danger of these platforms.
Yes.
The beauty of it is that we can also have this conversation, and you hope the right people hear it and you put it out there. But, that is what has the biggest change, and I was talking to someone recently about the change in the Elvis community, where it used to be if something negative came out, all the fans would stand up and fight back.
Yeah.
Now they fight each other.
Yes. A lot of discourse. Yeah.
So, and I do think that's social media because it gives everybody a voice. So we just need to be more careful about that. I'm not pointing fingers, I'm just saying we have to be more careful about it so that we collectively share real, true, honest information. Because then at the end of the day, hopefully the goal is that Elvis will be less sensationalized and less romanticized and more respected.
Yes, absolutely. And I used to be the person that thought that like if I didn't win everybody over, then I was somehow failing him and not succeeding at my goal with what I do. But I do think you have to just understand that if you see something that you might not agree with from an educated perspective of, how you might think differently, then you put out the content that you want people to see, given like the research that you've put into it. And then it is just like a hoping, like, I'm going to put this out, and then whoever it reaches, it's meant to reach, whoever agrees with it, great. And if you don't, then you do not have to watch it. But I have to say like what I want to say. It doesn't mean you have to fight about it. It doesn't mean you need to like bully people about it.
Right.
If you don't agree with what somebody else is saying or something that you've seen, you make the content that you think people should see on your own from an educated, research it first, and then do what you want to do with your own content. And you just, the people it's meant to reach, it's going to. Instead of
absolutely so important. And I think it's incredible that you have that level of maturity at your age, because I say all the time that if I would have written an Elvis book at 20 or 30, I would have failed miserably at it, because I did not have the maturity to handle putting work out there and have it be unjustly criticized. I would not have been able to handle it as I have been in my 40s, because in the beginning, I wasn't prepared for it. I thought people would disagree with the book. They might disagree with what it says. I didn't know that there'd be personal attacks out there. Everything that you think you know about social media, you really don't know until you're a contributor and it comes at you. And then you realize that social media is both good and bad, and it is all sorts of things in between.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I don't think just someone who has a, is connected with friends and family can understand that to the level of someone who contributes, right?
Yes.
So it didn't last very long because, I had the mentality that the work would speak for itself. And I think over time it has. This isn't about me. This is about Elvis. And the more people who read the book and the more people who talked about it, people were listening to them and not me. And then it kept spreading and it's been successful. And I'm so happy for that because I say all the time, it's all for Elvis. And I truly mean that. Like that layer of information people have to know. And it's not like we're these rigid dictators in what we're saying about Elvis either. And I think it's really important that we point that out because you can read my book and I do believe there's room to debate. Like what really killed him? Was it the long-term use of this medication, which did become a problem? I don't sugarcoat that. He really did have a problem with prescription medication. Or was it these very real illnesses? 9 of the 11 systems of the body disease, 5 of them present prior to fame, most likely since birth. There's without question an element of self-medicating, if not more. And I point out in the book that it's much, much more. And when you look at how Gladys died and 3 of her brothers, Elvis's demise was inevitable, in my opinion, when you compare the degenerative health pattern of all of those relatives, and it's identical, right?
Right.
They're not rock and roll stars. They're not taking the medication, yet they have this 4-year period of degenerative health that's identical. Again, that's where that common sense comes into play, right?
Yeah.
We can apply it. But if you read the book, like I said, there's room to discuss. I'm happy to have that discussion. So you still think the medication killed him? Okay, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
It might have killed him over time, or it had a very negative effect over time. But there is zero evidence of an overdose. It's not a drug death. His drug was unequivocally not. There is no evidence of overdose at all. And the book goes through that, what you would look for. Medical examiners, even in 94, someone reviewed the case and again said it was cardiac arrest. So it is not a drug-related death. That is for sure. But there is room to debate. But like I said, right? He has these illnesses, but he also has this problem. So it's not like we're sitting here saying you have to think this about Elvis or you have to feel like this about Elvis.
Right.
But there are historical facts and those have to remain in place. And then again, testimony, documentation, citation, and then there's room for some intellectual debate about a few things, maybe music, like what he should have recorded, what he didn't record, what should have happened, what movie should he have made. Those are things we can talk about, but it doesn't have to be this mean, you don't know anything about Elvis, thing that happens.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's something that, as beautiful as this community is, and it really truly is, I think that communication is such a challenge for a lot of people, both a part of the community and then not, like, as a creator having to deal with people who are just maybe seeing your content on their For You page or something that's suggested to them, and then they feel the need to like share their opinion. I think it's a lost art that people know how to share an opinion or share what you're thinking, but also like be able to listen to somebody else and not just hear what they're saying, but listen to them, and also have an open mind to really think about what they're telling you and what they're saying to you, and then vice versa, because I've so many times learned something from somebody I didn't agree with at all, but I'm still learning from them and learning how to make, a more educated argument in the future or whatever it might be.
Or maybe it helps you ask the right questions.
Yes.
That's a really interesting idea that we don't think about, right? Like this book is why does Elvis turn to the medication? Why does he keep turning to the medication? Those are questions that no one asked or answered before.
Right.
So you have to know what question to ask too, whether it's in discussion or presentation or any of this. And sometimes those conversations lead to that. And I agree. I've had conversations where, there are contributors. We don't all agree with each other on everything. And I have found that those conversations lead me to some really good questions that lead to other ideas and thoughts that are fruitful. So
yeah, in the back pocket for the next time you talk to somebody, or you even like you make a new post and you're like, I had a discussion with somebody the other day and they really got me thinking about this, and they were bringing up some good points or whatever, and like answering those whys, because that's really a lot of what people have are like the whys, why this happened, instead of thinking, like how could this happen, but like why did it happen?
And we're talking a lot about within the community, some of the challenges with false information getting repeated as fact and things like that. But don't you agree that part of the hard thing that we deal with is as contributors is outside of the community? And sometimes that's where I find my best questions or the thing I really want to look into. Because I've won 3 book awards. I've done really well with Destined to Die Young and Destined to Fly. I've been on an Elvis panel, with Elvis's nurse and his pilot, and 3 actresses it's amazing. Like I sit there and I think, how did this happen?
Yeah.
Yet still outside of the Elvis community, people are like, really? You write Elvis books?
Yeah.
My daughter in high school has a graphic design class, and she had to do a logo for someone. So she designed a logo for me. And her teacher said, so what is, I'm designing this for my mom. And he says, so what does your mom do? And she says, well, she writes Elvis books. And the teacher said, no, really, come on. What does she do?
Thought it was a joke.
Yeah. Like, really, what does she do?
Yeah.
So it's interesting too. Number one, not only be taken seriously, for what you're trying to contribute to this historical figure, and you want him to be perceived in a certain way, and you want to help that, but then all of the doubt and negativity that exists about Elvis outside of the Elvis community, sometimes it's astounding. I think sometimes we forget because we're so spoiled to be friends with so many people, and it just becomes such a big part of our life that it's sometimes it feels insulting and negative, that thing that happens, right? Do you feel like that sometimes? Like it's kind of like people look down on what you do, or like, why are you wasting your time with that?
I think that's like my number one negative feeling that I have doing what I do. And I did write that down. I want to talk to you because you brought that up, that it'd be a good topic of conversation. But like just finding, I like the way that you phrased it too. Like, how do we demand respect for what we do? Because because you brought up again with the historical figure thing, like if somebody were to be a researcher of war or a researcher of, whatever it might be in history, history's so vast, but like it almost seems like you wouldn't think twice about, oh, you wrote a book about that? That's so interesting that it's so niche that you would be,
if you wrote books about Abraham Lincoln, no one's going to say, really?
Yeah, nobody. So
no one's going to say that.
Right. It's such a struggle. And I think too, like for me, it's such like age becomes such a big part of that too. Cause I get a lot of that, like you weren't there, or like, oh, that's sweet, you must think he's cute, or like whatever it is, where it becomes like that lack of respect, but also like just downplaying what you do a lot. And like like as if it's not, as important as other parts of history but Elvis shifted everything. Like without Elvis, there would be music today would not be the way it is. And so many things would not be the way that they are. Like, so I don't understand why we don't get that level of respect that other researchers do.
Yeah, because it's a commitment. And I joked earlier about how you can put a video out, YouTubers can put a video out twice a week, and I have to wait like 2-3 years for a book. But it's still the same level of commitment. Like I'm working on it every day, just like you're working on it every day.
Absolutely.
So it's a level of commitment that's important. And, we believe in the legacy of Elvis Presley and that it be preserved and respected. And if it had been preserved and respected like it should have been, for the last almost 5 decades, and we wouldn't even have to do this,
Yes. Yeah.
We wouldn't even have to do it, but he has not been treated like a historical figure for so long. I mean, especially I was thinking, about how the timing of his death is really unfortunate, because those early 80s were just journalism shifted with tabloids, supermarket tabloids were the precursor to the internet.
Yes.
And they, there were always Hollywood gossip magazines, but not like the National Enquirer and Star, and how those were just on, at every grocery aisle in the 80s.
Yep.
And people didn't quite know yet whether they were true or not true. They didn't know what to do with it, until, everybody figures that out eventually. But the timing of his death, I think, is unfortunate with the way journalism went. I mean, when you look at that whole thing with, is Elvis still alive? And someone like Bill Bixby is hosting the TV show, like he was in movies with Elvis. How does that happen? So I just think it's the timing of sensationalized TV, right?
Yep.
TV changed so much in the 80s too. You have those sensationalized talk shows happening. Then the tabloid journalism is happening, and Elvis is just a victim to all of that. So it makes it even harder for him to kind of historically, get where he needs to be.
Absolutely. And now our jobs, I feel like, are even more commendable because we're having to dig and like, I don't know, uncover so much that has been buried for years and years and like ignored and treated as like, oh, that's not important because this is more interesting and more like like shock value that you would believe this instead. And that's what's been pushed for so many years. But like people like you who are putting in that work to take a step back and be like, wait, no, and then you have to get everybody to like hop on that train. And so like that's a lifelong like challenge within your work is to get people to not only listen to you but also like agree that like you didn't pull this stuff out of thin air. Like you research this, you put time into it, and you have that credibility behind it. So
it's not a simple thing. Like that is not a simple thing, and it's ongoing still, and I hope it's ongoing forever because I hope I sell copies of Destined to Die Young every week forever because it's that important,
Yes.
It's that important in terms of understanding Elvis. But it's incredible. I say all the time, it's incredible to have something to say and then be heard.
Yep.
And that has been just a tremendous gift from the Elvis community that I have received. And I don't take it for granted and I don't take it lightly because it's just been an amazing experience. But I also profoundly believe in what I've had to say.
Right. And important.
I believe in it because I care too, So I think, I think all of that is important. And I don't know why, like you said, it's downgraded or looked, as it's, because it's the research is done in the same way. If I had written a book about George Washington, I would do the research in the same way.
Right. Exactly.
So, and really it's even more validated because people who knew Elvis are still alive, and I talked to a lot of them. So
you got first-hand accounts for people who were there and who spent so much time with him.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
So it's fascinating.
It is. I always say too, like at the end of the day, I don't think Elvis will ever truly be out of people's mouths or minds. I think, we just had 2 movies made in the last 2 years, and like, people have a slew of opinions and just so much to say about the relationship, Elvis Priscilla, or just Elvis himself, the Colonel, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But like, as long as that's continuing, whether it be good or bad, it's great for us because we have that space in the room because people are still listening. People are still interested and intrigued, for better or for worse. And so we have at least an opportunity to have our voices and our input heard too, to kind of balance and,
And he's that striking. He's that amazing. He's again, his historical value is that big. We have to stop reducing him to, our favorite singer or our favorite, whatever, because we do it too, we do it too.
Oh, yeah.
But he's bigger than that, and when I look at this profile behind me, that's what I'm always struck with is that that profile just tells me, it just shows me exactly who he was, exactly what he did, how phenomenal it was, and how it's had this lasting impact.
Yeah.
And, that's what I was going to say. I don't know. It's so, it is important, and it does, like I watched a 4-part documentary on Willie Nelson recently, on Paramount. It's had some really good new stuff out. June Carter Cash. There was an old Chuck Berry interview that popped up on one of the news shows I watch all the time. And in listening to all those people, they all give me ideas about how to think differently about Elvis.
Sure.
And I think, there's a reason why we keep coming back, right? Like you said, we'll always be talking about him, but we have really delved in, and we're still learning more, and there's still more to delve into all the time, and there are Elvis fans and contributors who study the jumpsuits, and the people who study the live performances, and they know each one and what he sang in each city, and all of that. So everybody kind of finds their niche too, which I think is lovely. For me, it's understanding the choices he makes.
Yes.
I want to understand the man and what he's thinking at that time and why he makes those choices. And that's my thing, So I think everybody has their thing, and you're never done learning. And I think that's a fascinating aspect of Elvis, is that there's just always more. There's always more. And I know that keeps us coming back. But I think that's intriguing to other people too. I kind of always say everyone's an Elvis fan, whether they know it or not. So we just need to help more people figure it out, because it's Americana. It's like nobody hates George Washington. You can't hate Elvis.
Yeah. he's connected to something in like even little ways.
Yeah, it's
all
such
the
a part of
time.
our culture and who we are
Yes.
and what this country is and what it represents and what's possible.
Absolutely.
You know, especially since 1950, I think he's just a part of everything, whether people realize it or not.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I have a couple questions to ask you in the spirit of talking about connection, but to close off. First of all, just what connected you to Elvis? Like, do you remember the first time that you kind of learned like about him, or like the spark was like, oh, I want to know more?
Oh, vividly. And it's
Yeah.
amazing, isn't it, when you think about your childhood and how much you don't remember?
Yeah. And then it's like, oh, this one thing could tell you like it was yesterday.
Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
I have siblings, so I'll be talking to my siblings and they'll be like, well, remember that one time Aunt so-and-so came over and then so-and-so was in town from California and we all had
Yeah.
pizza at the house. Like, I don't remember that.
No. No.
Really? When is this? You know? So, so it's even more striking, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, the first time I heard Elvis sing, absolutely.
Yes. Like I vividly remember sitting on the living room floor and having Aloha album open, you know, and the way that it opened and closed was so cool.
Yeah.
And then Long Tall Sally was on it. So my name was in a song. Like that was so cool, you know? And I just remember looking at that stance that when you pull it out, you know, the record sleeve, he has that iconic Elvis stance. And as a kid, just thinking he looks so different.
Yeah.
He looks so different. And my dad was born in 35 as well. So we mostly heard a lot of Sinatra. He wasn't a big Elvis fan, but he loved the Aloha special. So that album was one that I heard a lot. And then I discovered 50s Elvis on my own. And again, things you remember.
Yeah.
I have nothing in the house that I can play this on, just so you know.
Right. It's just
I assume the music is still on this cassette, but
right. Oh, that's so cute.
But
so that
I
was
bought
your first
with my own money at Kmart after church on a Sunday.
Yeah. See, you remember every detail.
I remember buying it.
Yeah.
You know, again, why? So to me, these moments are so striking now because of what I do, you know, for a living and my passion project that has changed my life radically. It's all connected to this. Like it's all part of this. Yeah. And I think that's amazing. So it's like, don't give up on the things you're passionate about because you never know where they're going to eventually show up in your life, you know? And I took this home and I had a little purple cassette player and I would play it over and over and over, especially Don't Be Cruel. So, you know, play it, rewind. And I'd sit in the driveway and listen to this Elvis cassette. And then, you know, Jailhouse Rock was on TV. So it just really... everything 50s, you know, just kind of exploded for me. And actually so Ron Strauss, Elvis's pilot, brought this for me in January. He said, I thought you'd like this, Sally. And you can see.
Oh, I've seen this before.
Yeah, you've seen it before. It's Marilyn and James Dean. It's like, oh, thank you, Ron. I love it. You know, but when I look at that, I see my childhood. Because I'm not saying it was normal. It was very abnormal. In the early 80s, you know, to be a huge James Dean fan and a huge Marilyn Monroe fan and a huge Elvis fan. Right. That was my thing. And I read books. My mom would take me to the library. I got books on all those people. I was always reading about anything, you know, 1950s, but especially Elvis. Like Elvis just always stayed. And, you know, we've talked about this too, just because it's like, I always feel like I was born too late. So, you know, when I was a kid, it was fine to love all this stuff. It was just because you don't think about so much what other people think about you, you know, but I, especially when I went to college and in my 20s, I just totally set it aside because there's no one to talk to about it. Yep. And that's when we talk about the negative part of social media. The lovely part is that we're all connected now.
Absolutely.
That didn't exist before, you know, for a kid who was born too late, who loved a song that was recorded in 1956 and 1984. There was no one to connect with. Yeah. You know, so it was kind of always a challenge. And in my 20s, it was a real challenge because it was just always like the things I really know a lot about. They don't come up in conversation, you know? Right. And then I had kids, so that just takes over your whole life. But then as the kids got older, and again, I'd done a lot of writing, but I wanted to write about something I loved. Like Elvis just came back. Like it was amazing, you know. And I've told the story before about how my initial books that I would save my money and buy as a 10-year-old, my sister had, and she passed away. So I got those books back. I reread them. And then that's really where everything started over again for me. But to be now in my 40s and, you know, have you as a friend and
a
ton of other people,
craziness,
as good friends who care so much about the same thing. Like it's just such a gift.
It's the biggest blessing for sure, because I don't even know I don't even remember what life was like before I was here. And that's crazy, because it wasn't that I've only been in like the community I've had my account for like 4-ish years, but like, my life must have been so boring before I was here, because nobody, my mom, that's it.
So how did you discover Elvis? Because you're a young Elvis fan. It's outside of your time too.
Yes. My mom loved him when she was my age. So, well, younger than me, but like, you know, grew up with him and then raised me and my brothers on him. So we always had his music in the house. And my mom, I remember the first time I saw Elvis, like in a movie, my mom showed me like King Creole on Mother's Day when I was 4 years old, and I sat on the couch with her and I watched, you know, that movie. And I just like all my life loved him. And I remember going to middle school and like reading Elvis and Me and like having that in my backpack, and everyone's like, why? Like, what about Hannah Montana? Like, I was never cool. Like,
we are the same person in different decades, you and me.
Exactly. Yes, exactly that. It's not cool. Like, I feel like now it's a little different. Cause like if you like vintage things now, it's like cool a little bit, like to be an old soul. But no, when I was younger, like nobody liked him. And so I had nobody to talk to. And like my mom would listen to Sirius XM Elvis radio with me. And like I shared it with my mom. But then in 2019, I went for my graduation trip, I think like 4th trip to Grayson or whatever. And I'd been there before, but something just shifted that time where I was like, oh, wait, he's actually more than just like that guy in the suit. Like he did this and he did that and he knew these people. And like, I didn't know he was into this. And then it just spiraled into like, I have so much to say and so much I want to know.
Yeah.
And so I like my last desperate attempt was like to make a fan page in hopes that I would reach, like in my mind, the little old ladies who would like also like him, because that's just who I thought liked Elvis.
Yeah.
And I would say now the majority of like my friends are, you know, younger people and like people my age, like people like you who are not like, we did not know him in our time, but I have such a community of that. It's
amazing because you're right. I just kind of, before Elvis, I just always knew that like 80-year-olds, I connected with 80-year-olds better than 30-year-olds or 40-year-olds. You know, like I loved, if I could create an opportunity to sit down and talk to someone older, those were the most rewarding situations for me. And I do have a lot of older friends through Elvis, but I also have friends now my age, and it is remarkable because I never would have seen that coming. And just for a moment, think about the difference between, I'm not sure how much older I am than you, but say, I know that I was carrying around a 10th anniversary of his death magazine at grade school. So that would be 87.
Okay.
And I had it on top of my books, you know.
Yep.
took it to recess and read my magazine over and over and over again. So then you're probably talking more like 2007 or, you know, early 2000s, right? So for me, it was that magazine on the newsstand because it was the 10th anniversary of his death. It was Elvis and Me coming out and reading that. You know, Oprah Winfrey had her show every day, and there was a couple times when Elvis was the topic, but there was no YouTube. There was no internet. There was no way. There was no Sirius radio. I remember there used to be on Sundays, you know, my dad, if we were in the car with my dad, Sinatra was on, and there was a Sunday Sinatra show as well. But then there was also like on another AM station, there was an hour of Elvis, the Elvis hour, right? So like some Sundays we could listen to the Elvis hour.
Sure.
And not Sid, whatever it was, you know, Sinatra. And then that was like, oh, good, I get to hear Elvis music. But otherwise, there wasn't an Elvis channel 24 hours a day. There was no YouTube where I could go and watch the Ed Sullivan Show performances. You know, so I had an older brother who would occasionally take me to the video store, and I rented Elvis on Tour, and This Is Elvis, and the tour that Priscilla did of Graceland. You know, you rent them and you watch them, and you got to take them back again. So it's fascinating to think that I became such a fan and I loved all of it. And I think it was mostly through books at the library because all this other stuff just was not at our fingertips like it is now.
Which we were talking about that a little bit before too, but it's so great for people now that they have everything at their fingertips, even though it is definitely overwhelming because you have everything there at once to listen to or take it for what you will. But like now you can, for better or for worse, Google, did Elvis blah blah blah, and you're gonna get a slew of information that you can learn about.
You are, and it's a challenge. I remember when the movie came out, and I'm not a huge fan of the movie because I feel like it's maybe 20% accurate.
Yeah.
And it's not. I feel like it does depict a weak Elvis personally, and I don't believe Elvis was a weak person. But Alison Butler did a great job. People love it. That's fine. It's okay.
Yeah.
I know that I look at everything in a different perspective too.
Sure.
But when I see historical films, and I love historical films, I always go to like Hollywood versus history and things like that. And it'll tell you what they got right and what they got wrong. I couldn't believe how many articles I went to that still got it wrong as they were trying to correct the film.
Yes.
And that was a big aha moment of just how much misinformation there is out there.
Yep.
It's a ton.
Yeah.
And I don't think journalists really could ever, like when you talk about new fans, I'm not sure that journalists know where to start. And I actually reached out to one last week, for better or worse. And I do this at times. I usually don't hear back, but it was a tabloid type publication. And it was an article published in December. And it had every myth about Elvis you can imagine in there. So I emailed the guy. And I said, this article has a lot of outdated information in it about how Elvis died. And I attached a PDF of the book. Well, I'm interviewing with him on Tuesday.
Nice.
So
congrats.
That can go either way. It's still a publication that usually does not treat Elvis respectfully, but I'm taking the chance because whoever reads those publications, they're the ones who need to hear the correct updated information. Because I do think it's very difficult for just a regular journalist who has to write about Elvis because it's his birthday or because it's the anniversary of his death and get it right.
Right.
Because there's so much bad information out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a prime example of, it's still relevant in some way. So there's room for you to step in and help, clear up some stuff and add some truth in there, which is so important. That's awesome.
Yeah. So it was nice that he got back with me, and we're going to do an interview. And like I said, it's a risk for me too, because it's, it's one of those sometimes it's that kind of publication that you can't trust, but at the same time, you got to do something. You have to try. So
yes, absolutely. Everything's a risk. I mean, like, I know you don't do TikTok, but like stitching is, I hate to do it, but like I do, because the people who saw that video will see my video because I stitched it. And stitching sometimes turns into like attacking or whatever, and that's never my intention. But I'm like, if I stitch this, then the people who saw that will see mine, and like that is my goal. So, it's scary because you're putting yourself out there, and like that people are gonna criticize for days and days. But at least you did it, and it's out there, and and you're confident in it, and like that's the most important thing.
Yeah. And, your reputation has to speak for itself. So if you get misquoted or something gets put together that doesn't represent you like you want it to, you just lead with integrity all the time, and it'll work out. And then people who know the difference. But I take that risk with things that are published, because you can't just walk by and do nothing. But I know you must have it even harder though, because you deal with a whole different demographic and generation than I do. Because you're on the, like, I mostly stick to Facebook, which is an older demographic, but you're TikTok and Instagram. So you're dealing with a lot of 20-something-year-olds, right? And then it's a whole different, not fight. I don't want to say fight, but it's a different, layer to overcome.
It is a battle
type of information to overcome, I guess.
It is a battle of sorts for sure. And like each one, and that's just why I'm not so much on Facebook, I think, is because I already have my plate so full of like the extreme of one side, or like the extreme of one generation, like you're saying, of people who are so set in their ways. And I think that's the same for like older generations too. Like they are so set in their ways and so set in what they think. But I think, same is true of us. And like younger people are so confident now, and like they have whatever they, they could look up anything and like think that they are grounded in what they know. And so it is a battle of sorts to be able to put yourself into the conversation and be like, I know this is not the way that you think about it, but it, it wouldn't hurt to maybe open your mind up a little bit to thinking in this way.
Yeah, it's just it's interesting to kind of keep pushing back at that all the time, and you do have to have a kind of like Elvis was not a weak person, right? Because he had to keep going forward and putting himself out there. You can't, it's we're just so I think there's a level of commitment that you just, once you're a part of all of this, and you, like I said, you care so much about Elvis, and I care from that historical perspective and how he is viewed in that historical lens.
Right.
I couldn't walk away from it now because it does feel that important to me, and I know it feels that important to you.
Yes, absolutely.
Get it right.
Yeah, and I think that's what carries you through, because it is, at the end of the day, like, so it can be so exhausting to have to interact with so many situations like these and people of all different sorts from all over the place. But like, it is just because I love him so much, and like, at the end of the day, that it just makes it worth it to know that like you're doing something to help somebody's legacy that, has touched your heart so deeply. And for me, it's never been like oh, I have to do this, or like, oh, I don't even want to talk, like, I don't want to have to bring this up again or whatever. It's just always, I don't know, I go into a mode where I'm just like, no, like, this, it has to be said. I'm gonna say it. Like, if people don't agree with you, then it's okay, but you're not doing it for me. I'm not doing it so people will like me or people will respect me. I'm doing it for somebody who I love very much and who is very much part of my own family. So
yeah, and I hope we don't sound negative to people, because that's not it at all. I think we're just we're connecting over some of the challenges that we face, right? That's what this is.
Yes.
Because it is so important to us, but then you kind of hit these brick walls at times, and that gets a little frustrating. But it's also just the most incredible work. I find it to be incredibly rewarding, great fun. Again, sometimes you have to have those arguments over things that don't make sense, and that gets frustrating because you do it a lot. You do it more than you want to, because you want to work on the positive stuff. You don't want to keep working on that negative thing, but you have to, and you have to get, what matters out there, and you want to spend more time on this positive stuff that you want to be doing, but then this has to be taken care of too. So it's always that challenge. And as contributors, we talk about the challenges of that. But we also talk about how it has brought the most incredible people into our lives. And it absolutely has. I have more rewarding friendships than I've had my entire life, just because I am so anchored now into my interest. And then I'm connected with other people who are anchored in the same interests. And then it's also my work. So it's a whole different thing for me too. It's like going to Memphis and Tupelo. And I just went in November, which was really nice. I spent 3 days in Tupelo and a couple days in Memphis, just as a fan. I didn't have any work attached to it, because it's hard for me to go and not work, because it's hard to get away from the kids and all that kind of stuff. But like, I needed it just to kind of regroup, and it was so much fun and to remember, and it was so lovely. And because I love going at birthday and Elvis week too, I absolutely love it, and I am there as a fan first and foremost. But then there's the element of work, that has to go into it, because you want people to read these books, and you want people to know this layer of Elvis. And I want to connect with everybody that I have connected with there. So it's all lovely, and it's all just been an incredible experience. Life-changing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And for all the hardships that I've come across in like my years of being in this community, I wouldn't trade them for anything. And I have developed such a sense of gratitude to Elvis for, kind of leading me through those things, because it's so many life lessons, like things that not even just learning about Elvis, but learning about myself and learning about how to communicate with people and collaborate with people, and just like learning how to be a better person through being here. So all of those things that we talk about that, make our work a little bit more challenging has shaped our work and shaped us as people into like people. I know I'm proud of myself, and like, I'm sure you're proud of you and your work. And I have Elvis to thank for that, because without being here, I have grown, I wouldn't have grown as much as I did as a person. And
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
It does. It changes you. I think it's connecting with so many people from so many places and so many backgrounds and so many countries.
Yes. Yes.
You know, around the world, and it does change your life. And yeah, last April I was given a literacy award at the Missouri Cherry Blossom Festival, and in my acceptance speech I said, you know, I want everyone here to know that Elvis is still universal. Like I have friends around the world because of Elvis, and that he has brought so much love into my life and so much connection into my life and so much friendship and so much experience.
Yeah.
And all of that is true. I mean, it's true 10 times over, and it's remarkable. And I didn't plan it that way. And you can't force it. You know, it's as I always say, you know, I was going to write that book no matter what, because I knew how important it was for Elvis, but it could have been the 10 people I'm related to who read it, you know, and it just turned out that it's been bigger than that. And it's been an incredible experience. But again, I think we both had this similar experience of loving these things that weren't from our era. They're from the previous generation or 2 generations. And that had its challenges. It absolutely had its challenges. And now it just feels like a really perfect thing.
Yeah. Yeah. A blessing for sure. And that's the magic of it almost, you know, like you never would have dreamed, I don't know about you, but like that I would be living life as I am right now 4 years ago when I started doing what I do. So it's just like, you never knew that you needed the people or the experiences or the lessons or whatever you've learned through being here until you had them. And then you're so grateful that you're here in the first place.
Yeah. And it's like you said, it's a blessing, and it's unbelievable to me because I can still see that kid in the driveway with her purple cassette player playing this, you know, or sitting on the front porch and reading my Elvis and Me, you know, for the 10th time. And now I am friends with the people that I read about.
Yes.
You know, that's
crazy.
That strikes me all the time, and it never gets old. And it's, like I said earlier, like having something to say and then being heard, that's a remarkable gift that I do not take for granted. And I appreciate every single person who has read my books, because it's lovely to be able to share it. You know, it was important for me to research and write it, but then to share it has just been such a beautiful experience. But like we talked about with birthday, was a little bit quiet this year, you know?
Yeah.
I think people had gone twice last January, and it was a smaller birthday. So, you know, I'm there at the Holiday Inn at John Daly's festival, and it was, I'm joking with Ron Strauss and Tish Henley Kirk and Sherry Lacker and Angie Lacker.
Right.
And we're all just sitting around laughing.
Yes.
And, you know, I walked away from that thinking, that's incredible.
How did I get here?
How lucky am I?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
How lucky am I?
Yes. Gratitude abound. Like, just
people knew Elvis, you know, they knew him well, and they were, for me, I don't know if you feel like this, but I'm also a huge Sinatra fan. And I think because Sinatra was alive in my lifetime, it's not hard for me to think of him as a real person.
Yes.
But with Elvis, sometimes, like, I have to remind myself, like, he really existed.
He existed.
You
Absolutely.
know?
I think that all the time.
He really existed, because I can't put myself in a concert and think there's Elvis on stage. What would that be like? I can't even picture it. And I think it's because he's, you know, I was born in 1977. So as far as I can remember, he's never been alive, right, in my lifetime.
Right.
And I think that's the difference. It just makes it feel less than real sometimes. So when you get the opportunity to spend time with these people who know the very real Elvis, you know, that's a gift.
Absolutely. And just makes, especially as people who are so invested into like learning more about who he was off stage, being able to talk with these people who can tell you stories that aren't printed in the books, or just like little things that like, if I heard this story about my grandma, I'd be like, oh, but if you're hearing about Elvis, like, oh, one time Elvis, that story Tish tells about like how he's sewing and he almost like ran over his finger or whatever, and he was laughing about it. I'm like, little things like that where it's like, oh my gosh, he was just a normal guy, and he was just like, he had fun, and he made jokes, and he was just a normal person. And like, it's hard to wrap your head around sometimes.
It is, even though that's our job. I mean, that's certainly the intent of my book, was to restore his humanity. Like, looking at his flaws that we can't see from the outside. He looks so perfect on the outside, but he's so flawed on the inside.
Yep.
You know, it does expose a layer of his humanity that we haven't seen before. And it was such a goal of mine. And I feel like I know my Elvis, like we talked about earlier, you know?
Yes.
So he's very real in that way. He's very real. But like you said, like walking, living, breathing, walking in and out of Tish's trailer, you know, that's still very hard to imagine sometimes.
Right. I agree. One last thing to close us off. This is kind of like a hefty question, but I'm interested to hear your answer. But what's one thing, if you could tell Elvis fans collectively one thing, what would you want them to know?
I think it ties back to the fact that he was a strong person, like we talked about. You can't do something first and be different and be weak. You know, it's that whole, I hate when people say no Colonel, no Elvis. And I don't want to get into the Colonel debate. I don't, because like everybody else, the Colonel is good and bad, like every human being, you know, and there's room to debate how good and how bad. But Elvis was going to be Elvis without the Colonel.
I have said this before. I hate when people say, you know, whoever, it doesn't even have to be the Colonel, whoever shaped Elvis, without this person, Elvis wouldn't be here. It's like, no, absolutely not. Like he could have gotten.
First of all, people were already showing up to see him. He was already on his way to being Elvis. It's not like he, you know, picked him up in Tupelo or something and no one knew him. And then this idea that the Colonel is the only person below the Mason-Dixon line who has New York contacts always blows my mind too.
Right.
Really? He's the only guy in the South who knows someone in New York City. Wow.
Right. Wow. Crazy.
I'm so glad he found Elvis then, you know?
Right.
And that is not to diminish the Colonel or what he did for Elvis in any way, but it is just, again, that little common sense. Like I want, you know, what do I want fans to do? I want them to apply common sense to everything they think about Elvis.
Yes.
So the common sense tells you that more than one person below the Mason-Dixon line had contacts in New York City, right?
Yep. There you go.
So that's an important one. Apply common sense to every Elvis idea you have. He was a strong man, not a weakling. And I think the biggest thing, and Elvis fans already know this, so I'm not going to tell them anything they don't know, but he was a decent person. And my Elvis, first and foremost, was a provider. He did not set out to be the most famous person on the planet and culturally shift the universe. And he did not wake up one day and say, I hear this different sound and everybody has to hear it because it's so incredible.
Right.
He woke up day after day after day after day for years and said, I have to find a way to pull my family out of poverty.
To provide.
So again, he gets romanticized with his relationship with his mother. The other thing I don't like is when people say, well, if his mother had lived longer, then Elvis would have lived longer. I don't believe there's any correlation to that either. Because he was always a part of her, you know, of him. The lessons, and like I always say too, if Elvis was his parents' son, if you believe that he is his parents' son, then he's not going to just take pills and be destructive just for the sake of being destructive, when his entire being is rooted in the idea of pulling them out of poverty and then keeping them there and then providing for them.
Exactly.
So I guess it's not just one thing I want people to know, but
there's not.
You know, Elvis was a provider first and foremost, and I believe that wholeheartedly. I don't believe there's a lot of room for debate on that. I believe he was a provider. I believe he saw himself that way. And it answers all those questions. Why doesn't he stop when he's sick and he knows he needs to stop? He always saw himself as that provider. Once he found success, I just think he never stopped being committed to that.
Well, you think about like his generosity, that's all tied to wanting to provide for people, like giving the things away and, you know, buying things and immediately like giving it to somebody else. All that stuff is tied to wanting to better his own family and then other people as well. Like he was always just so generous with, I mean, he has that one thing that he wrote or whatever that's like, if you have money, don't give it away. Then like, what's the point?
What's the point? Yeah.
I think that's why he remained so humble too, is because he realized, and he was always searching for like purpose and all those other things too. I think he realized very early on that like money and success and fame was never the reason why he was doing what he was doing. It was, you know, there was more, and like just hoarding all of that and having that wasn't going to make him feel like he was doing anything or making the world a better place in any stretch of the imagination. So I feel like that's why he wanted to give so much, because he just knew that it wouldn't have no value if he didn't.
Right. And I think that's another place that's confusing for non-fans or the surface level fan, is that you see this guy who is so decadent in ways, right? With again, all the jewelry and the clothes, and he's so Elvis, especially in the 70s. He's just so visually Elvis.
Yes.
To think that he really is still humble and he's still more worried about providing for other people and giving so much of it away. Because by looking at him, you might think he is gluttonous and he might think he is super indulgent. And he was at times, I mean, that was the trade-off, I think, of all the hard work, of all the sacrifice of regular life, was that you indulge in this stuff. But it is remarkable that he didn't want to indulge himself. He wanted to share it, and not only with everyone around him, but with strangers over and over again. So I think he's a decent, normal human being. And maybe that's the other thing too. It's like with this generosity book that I'm working on next. I think outside of the Elvis world, you hear people Elvis gives away cars and jewelry, and people will think, well, how many drugs did he take before he gave all that away? Right. And then inside the Elvis world, there's this godlike notion of him. Like he was just infallible. Right. And both are a huge disservice to Elvis, because he was a very real, flawed, normal human being. And I think both inside and outside of Elvis land, that people don't want him to be normal. I think they want these extraordinary stories. And at the root of it, I think he was just a normal guy. I agree.
Yeah. And like we always say too, the sensationalism and the shock value always, is more intriguing. So people are always, and it could be, like you're saying, could be both ends of the spectrum. People could praise him like he is a godlike figure, or, he is evil and you should not be listening to his music. Like it's, so to be able to view him as just a person, it's hard. But it's so necessary.
And it's amazing what you see when, again, you apply common sense, you apply, historical lens. There's just there's probably, we could, what would be good is if we came up with like 2 or 3 things you should always apply when thinking about Elvis.
Right?
Like a historical lens, common sense. And there's probably a couple more things that we could come up with. Human being, he's a normal human being. And if you think about him in that way all the time, then you're going to come up with more grounded ideas. But one of the times I really see that is when you hear these radio interviews that he does when he's maybe 20, 19, 20, whatever it is, he's so young, and yet he handles it all in such a mature, professional way, especially when they ask him about the negativity that he's receiving. He handles it so well. I don't know how he knows to do that. Like, it always blows me away. How does he know to handle that so well?
And so new to fame too. And he wasn't getting, how like people today get like publicity training and stuff. Like you can't say this, you can't say that. Like he wasn't getting that. He that was who he was coming out. Like
he was just a nice, normal, polite young man who had respect for people, right? And that's what comes across.
Yes. Oh, can't think of a better way to end this conversation.
Well, that's why we love him, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Amen to that. Thank you.
I'm so glad to know you too. Really.
Girl, listen, literally just a star in the Elvis world. I just respect you. I admire you so much. I can't wait for the new book coming out.
Me too.
So excited.
Me too. I want it done yesterday, because it is so important that I want it done, but it's going to take time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, all good things do. And I expect nothing less than greatness from you. No pressure. But no. But thank you so much for coming on and talking.
Absolutely. This was so nice. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. We gotta do it more often.
It's a great conversation. Like you had said when you set up your goals for the new year. It's just I thought, I reached out to you right away, and I said I love that, because we're all hungry for it. Even us contributors who work in it every day are hungry to have those conversations. And I know Elvis fans are hungry for that too. So this is it's been a treat.
Yeah, just unfiltered, talking about somebody who touched us both. And it's a special thing, and definitely something I needed too. So
absolutely.
I appreciate you. We'll do it again.
Sounds good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally.